Wait. Whoa. What is happening? It's me!
Imagine this. You've got a nice little trilogy of animated movies. Let's add a fourth one.
Like that's ever gonna happen. What a load.
Sequels, FOURquels, nah, forget about settling for those. We're setting this franchise on a Continental Drift of its own. FOURquels are an anomaly in the world of film. Oftentimes when you see a fourth entry in a movie franchise, your gut reaction is, why are there so many of these? There's something about seeing the number 4 attached to the name of an established franchise that kinda makes people assume that the franchise has overstayed its welcome. The idea of a film trilogy is so widely accepted for most people that I guess it makes them subconsciously think that any installment after that is therefore unnecessary. Now, I don't personally buy into this belief. I am a Yakuza fan at the end of the day, but it certainly doesn't help that a lot of fourth installments tend to either really suck or be super forgettable. You're always going to reach a point in a franchise's lifespan where the number at the end of the title is going to scare people away, and it's not a coincidence that a fair few fourth entries in franchises ditch numbering altogether and instead give each new installment its own unique title. From a marketing perspective, this definitely removes that air of "step aside, old man" that a lot of people would otherwise have about a new installment. Ice Age 4 is still bad though. Animated movie FOURquels. I'm not calling them FOURquels because no one watching YouTube knows how to read anyway, and also, Christ, that's an ugly word. Bottom 3 for sure. I probably shouldn't have written this on my council tax letter. Animated movies don't have a particularly stunning track record with fourth installments. A lot of the time they're either super unnecessary or just really bad or boring movies. I'm gonna just save myself some future hassle and say that I think Shrek Forever After is alright. It's still a FOURquel though. These are the installments where you can tell the franchise is running out of steam and mostly just being used to collect an easy bag of money. Some of them have interesting ideas behind them for sure, but the execution always leaves something to be desired. And in the rare case I actually enjoy the movie, I still feel pretty underwhelmed by the end result. Very few animated franchises ever get to the point of having a fourth installment. Many either settle for having a sequel or rounding out a completed trilogy and just calling it there. And hey, even if you do want more of a specific world and its characters, you gotta commend the people behind them for knowing their limits. Unless it's a corporate decision somehow. But let's be honest, when you have a successful film franchise, the only thing the suits are gonna want is more of it. Alright, so, Alvin and the Chipmunks, the road chip. But when you get those rare cases where a successful franchise actually lives to see a fourth entry, oh man, it's just so exciting! We're approaching levels of mid previously thought impossible! So I thought it'd make for a fun little video if I went and watched a ton of fourth installments in many popular animated franchises and see just how much I can disappoint myself. All of these are movies I've actually seen at some point, but a lot of them I can either barely remember or haven't watched at all since I was in primary school. Who knows, I could end up actually liking some of these, or at the very least finding something new to appreciate in all of them. Just kidding, I'm a bitch! Why the fuck is Ninja in this movie? Hotel Transylvania Transformania is the fourth entry in Sony's Hotel Transylvania franchise, which is the brainchild of animation legend Genndy Tartakovsky, except not this time, as he completely stepped away from directing this one, featuring an iconic vocal performance from Adam Sandler as Dracula, except not this time, as he just didn't show up to the recording booth for this one, and released around Halloween, which seemed pretty appropriate given its spooky monster element, except not this time. The film just straight up missed its release date, and then was held in distribution limbo for a really long time before Amazon finally bought the movie and then just dumped it onto streaming in January, the graveyard month. At quite literally every turn, this movie was getting boned. It was like multiple blatant signs from the universe that this movie should not have been made. It took forever for Sony to even find a distributor for this movie. That's how little anyone cared about Hotel Transylvania 4. No one wanted to touch this with a 10-foot pole, and that fact is hilarious. Now, I actually like the first Hotel Transylvania quite a bit. I find it pretty funny. It wasn't the most substantive movie ever, but as a fast-paced and silly comedy with Looney Tunes style slapstick and creative animation, I thought it was really solid. The second movie wasn't exactly great, but it was tolerable. The third movie... After the third movie, it became kinda obvious that they were running out of ideas really fast. I mean, they didn't even stay at the hotel in Hotel Transylvania, they just went on a cruise for a vacation movie and gave Dracula a love interest. Like, you could feed Paramount's marketing team for years with that kind of creative bankruptcy. Seriously, influencer Smurf, come on guys. So hopes were not high for Hotel Transylvania 4, like, at all. Do you want a graph? Especially with Tartakovsky not coming back to direct this movie. Like, as much as 4 tries, it definitely lacks that Gendy touch. And when asked about it, he basically told everyone to f*** off and watch Primal instead, which to me sounds like perfectly sound advice because Primal is awesome and absolutely worth your time. Wow, all of this and we haven't even gotten to the film itself yet. Hotel 4 is about Dracula planning to retire and leave the hotel in the hands of his daughter Mavis and her human husband Johnny, only for him to fear that Johnny is going to ruin the hotel because he's a human. And if your first thought from hearing that is, wow, that sounds pretty similar to the plot of the first movie, then oh boy do I have news for you, mate. Hotel Transylvania 4, for all of its visual and dialogue differences, is just the exact same plot as the first movie, completely rehashed for literally no reason other than creative bankruptcy. Say what you want about the previous 2 movies, at least they were different. At least they had completely different plots with different arcs instead of just doing the exact same thing the first movie did again, except with worse comedy and the loss of the guy who managed to make all this work in the first place. Like, seriously, so much is rehashed here. Dracula and Johnny clashing, then having to bond, which really shouldn't be a thing because they spent the last 3 movies together and he's been happily married with Dracula's daughter and had a kid with her since the second movie, so what the f***? The third act breakup over a misunderstanding, you get it by now. The whole plot is so transparently lazy and does nothing to justify the film's already confusing existence. And when pretty much at every turn the universe was telling you, no, stop, do not release this movie. I think this makes everything especially tragic and very funny, and likely the only thing I'll actually remember about this movie after this video is the fact that literally no one wanted this film to exist. And look, animation wise, this is still really fun and creative animation. I love how these movies look, and the visual comedy and slapstick, while not nearly as amusing as the previous movies, is still pretty funny. Also, Brian Hull, the guy that got to replace Adam Sandler as Dracula, did a pretty good job. Like, the average viewer is not gonna notice much of a difference here between his and Sandler's performances, though admittedly it's not hard to just find some random dude off the street, tell him to put on a bad Eastern European accent and just say, I do not say blah 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 into the microphone. Oh yeah, let's address the only thing this movie is going to be remembered by, and that's the controversy surrounding, can I even call this a controversy? It's almost like collective agony at the sight of twink death. Basically, when the first trailer for this movie came out and showed all the monsters turning into humans, every Hotel Transylvania stan who was just summoned, I guess, I didn't know those were a thing, cried out in complete shock and pain over the reveal that the Invisible Man wasn't actually secretly a hot twink, like all of the fan art I had no idea existed. Like, I get this was all deeply unserious at the end of the day, no one was rioting in the streets because they made the Invisible Man from Hotel Transylvania ugly, but I love the fact that there were petitions started specifically to get Sony to change his design and make him hotter, and it's even funnier knowing that this would be one of the few things the movie is actually going to be remembered for. If this movie had maintained its October release date with no delays and rode the waves of uproaring over the twink death event horizon, I think people not only would have actually bothered to watch this one, but probably would have remembered it somewhat. This is like the one installment in the franchise that almost no one has actually watched, not just because they can't be bothered, but because of all the constant delays and poor marketing, everyone just forgot it existed or was released at all. Probably didn't help that it skipped theaters entirely and went straight to streaming. Like, even I forget this movie released on a monthly basis. I always end up coming across a stray image of it on a news site or on anything Sony animation related and going, oh yeah, they did release a 4th Hotel Transylvania movie, didn't they? And trust me, I would rather be thinking of far more important things than Hotel Transylvania when I'm trying to take a shit. Now, conceptually, I'm not gonna pretend like there was much potential to mine out of the idea of, whoa, the monsters are humans and the human is a monster now. Like, it's really hard to write a feature-length film around a concept that simple. This concept would work fine if this was an 11-minute episode of a cartoon or something. Hell, it could probably be pretty entertaining, but having to stretch an extra hour and a half's worth of comedy and character arcs out of something this simple could not have been easy. I'm actually not that surprised they had to rehash the plot of the first movie to get anything out of it. At least I can say I like the way the movie ended. Dracula retires and lets Mavis and Johnny rebuild the hotel the way they want to. That was sweet, I guess. But like, yeah, Hotel Transylvania 4 is like the definition of a movie that doesn't want to exist, and also the poster child for a movie that literally no one actually wanted because literally no one wanted it. You can't even get mad at me for saying that. This is not YouTuber exaggeration. Who actually wanted this?
Look up! Ow, no!
Now, we may live in a restless and politically divided society of which it is difficult to find many things on which we can all universally agree upon, but could we all please just take a moment to acknowledge that someone was paid to animate a scene where a minion gets his ass stuck in a vending machine and is then spanked on the ass by 2 other minions, and just pray that they have recovered from whatever life-threatening illness they may have contracted from having to stare at and animate each individual frame of this horrifying visual. I just really need a peace of mind knowing that whoever was tasked with this is currently doing well and that they never have to explain any of this to a therapist. Despicable Me 4, the 4th installment in the wow, they'll really pay me $20 for babysitting if I just put the kids in front of the TV and put this on series of movies. I'll always maintain the stance that the first Despicable Me is a genuinely good movie and easily a cut above the rest of Illumination's catalog. It actually feels like the film came from a genuine place. It probably had something to do with the advertising having 30% less minions than we expect nowadays. The second movie is fine, the third is just sort of whatever, and the Minions movies are definitely some of the more forgettable ways you can scam audiences of $2 billion. These films definitely developed a poor reputation over time, as the moment Illumination saw dollar signs on their first ever movie, they realized they didn't need to actually try ever again. Blah 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 blah, we get it, alright. Illumination is a low-risk studio that plays it safe and makes a ton of money. This is not riveting or thought-provoking commentary. What's the big deal, Cartoonshi? I'll tell ya, Despicable Me 4 is an Illumination movie on autopilot.
What did you just say? Chai means D.
Look, I know how that sounds, right? Illumination movies are constantly criticized for being formulaic, basic, simple shit, but trust me when I say that Despicable Me 4 is somehow the most basic and milquetoast of them all. The film itself is like the perfect manifestation of Illumination as a company. It uses all of its good jokes and standout scenes in the trailers. The actual film follows a by-the-numbers plot that's somehow more by-the-numbers than the last film's by-the-numbers plot. The minions farts at the camera or something, Pharrell gets his bag, roll credits. These movies are designed in a lab to be as appealing to families as possible. They show up, fire a bunch of jokes at the wall, dazzle with some nice animation, then take another billion of your money. That's the Illumination formula, and here it's even more apparent. I remember reading somewhere that they don't actually want the characters to ever age. They kinda want Despicable Me to be the film equivalent to The Simpsons, where they can just keep infinitely pumping out painfully average sequels until the end of time and have no intentions of making it any more complex than that. And like, I don't need Despicable Me to be particularly challenging, for crying out loud. I'm not the target audience after all. But going back to the first movie and seeing how laugh out loud funny it was while telling a pretty touching story really makes me wish the newer movies had any of that sauce. Anyway, Despicable Me 4 is about Gru and his family having to relocate and assume new identities because one of Gru's old classmates is a villain and wants to exact revenge on Gru and his family. It's also about Lucy trying to adjust to her new life as a hairdresser and avoiding this one woman that she pissed off, an aspiring teenage supervillain living next door recognizing Gru and wanting to team up with him to perform a heist, Gru trying to get along with his new neighbors, the minions being recruited by the anti-villain league and are put into a new program to turn them into superheroes, multiple subplots involving Gru Jr. Despicable Me 4 is a film that completely lacks any kind of focus. I don't actually think the word focus is in the director's vocabulary. Previous Despicable Me movies have had a lot of stuff going on instead of the main plot, but this is the first movie where it genuinely feels overwhelming. There are too many underdeveloped stories happening at the same time, and even just cutting off half of them would still leave far too many for one film of this length and scope to handle all at once. Not a single one of the 5 million plot lines happening simultaneously in this film are even the least bit interesting or creative. You know how trailers nowadays will just blatantly lie to you about the plot of a film and just create scenes that only happen in the trailers in order to confuse the out of people and throw off anyone looking to post spoilers? I genuinely thought Despicable Me 4 was going to be a situation like that, because every time I looked at the marketing for this movie, I could not make heads or tails out of the plot whatsoever. And not in the way a good trailer does it, by giving you just enough details about the plot to stay interested, but leaving plenty of details out so you don't guess how the whole film is going to play out. I mean, it was genuinely confusing and the film looked like a muddled mess, which it is. It's a film that's trying to be several things at once without actually giving any of those things enough care and attention, so the whole film just becomes a selection of brightly colored, well-animated scenes that do not flow together. It's like the Family Guy of movies, where out-of-context clips and scenes are considerably better and more entertaining outside of the show itself. That's Despicable Me 4. It's Family Guy. This is also far and away the unfunniest film in the franchise, which is definitely not a good thing because these movies are supposed to be gag machines. They stopped caring about character writing ever since Despicable Me 2 dropped. Obviously, since Illumination's strategy is to just blindly throw a bunch of jokes at the viewer, there's going to be a select few that actually get a laugh or two out of me, but either they were already shown off in the trailer or they just got a chuckle out of me for like a second. The biggest reason this movie feels like it's on autopilot is because the jokes don't feel like jokes.
Silas, did you choose that because you knew I cut my own hair?
No.
It's just that, on repeat for the next hour and a half. The dialogue is so tame and edgeless and unfunny, apart from the slapstick and whatever the hell they've got the minions doing this time around. Any and all humor is either done through observational humor, which is always going to be hit or miss, or punchlines that just deflate halfway through being told. Honestly, the most interesting thing about these movies is how Steve Carell's performance keeps getting worse with every installment. Seriously, listen to how normal Gru sounds in the first movie.
How much for the fluffy unicorn? She hit that! I saw that with my own eyes.
The second movie and onwards just took his more high-pitched zaniness, usually reserved for more comedic moments, and just made that his default tone of voice.
Yeah, well, she is a nut job and I'm not going on any date.
Where he's screeching every single line of dialogue, and I just can't f***ing stand it. Listening to Gru speak was harder than having to actually sit down and watch any other boring or weightless scene across this entire movie. I was losing my mind. Either they need to get the voice director to chill out, or Steve Carell needs to stop recording every single scene like there's a hurricane outside the studio. It is genuinely one of the worst vocal performances I have ever heard in my life, and I can say for certain that it's bad voice acting because Steve Carell absolutely nailed Gru in the first movie. Hell, even in the second movie he wasn't that bad. I have no idea why they thought making Gru scream every time he says anything was a good idea, because it's not. It makes the entire movie insufferable because you're experiencing it through the eyes of a protagonist that won't shut his goddamn moon hole. There aren't really any character arcs worth mentioning here. Again, gave up on writing characters 4 movies ago. At least Pharrell keeps getting his bag with each of these movies, starting to wonder if he's personally financing them himself as a long-term investment because they always seem to pay off big time. And it's cool that he never half-asses the songs he does for these movies either. Double Life is an unironic banger, won't catch me listening to it regularly obviously, but it's a decent song and fits the movie very well. Funniest and most memorable part of all of this is everyone interpreting the song as a Drake diss just because of Pharrell's previous beef with Drake, and also because 2024 was the year everyone danced on Drake's grave. I'm gonna be real, as entirely unlikely it is that Pharrell Williams would choose to diss Drake on a song for a family-friendly Despicable Me movie, that reality is objectively hilarious, so I'm believing it until the day I die. It's funny imagining Drake taking Adonis to go see the new Despicable Me movie, and then suddenly having a chill be sent down his spine hearing "Some of your dirt has come to light," echoing all across the theater. Despicable Me 4 is more of the same, only amplified by trillions and trillions, and it results in a uniquely paralyzing and effortless experience that I don't want to tolerate ever again. It's a shame too, because Illumination is like an actual company and workspace apparently kicks ass. Like, not to do any corporate bootlicking here, but they're one of the few companies that has taken an actual negative stance on the usage of AI in art and animation, and from what I've gathered, they don't seem to treat their animators like shit either. I wish the studio itself produced movies that were above babysitting tier, but honestly, congrats to Illumination for not being trash. Despicable Me 4 is trash though, can't wait for the next one.
No! Get away from it!
Shrek Forever After is the 4th and final installment of the Shrek franchise, and the way it's been viewed over the years has changed so many times I can barely keep track of the general consensus. Back when this movie was due for release, Shrek was being viewed a lot more negatively after the release of Shrek the Third, which to this day is easily one of the worst movies DreamWorks have ever released. You ask the average person to remember half of what happened in Shrek the Third, and I guarantee you they won't be able to tell you shit. So much of the movie was just pointless filler that didn't even mean anything. It was painfully unfunny and crammed to the brim of pop culture reference schlock. Shrek the Third is the movie that people who don't like Shrek 1 and 2 think Shrek as a franchise is. That's the best way I can describe it. And after this movie, Shrek's reputation kinda tanked a bit. People still recognize the greatness of the first 2 films, but the damage Shrek the Third did to the perception of the franchise cannot be understated. And then here comes Shrek 4. You ever think about how this could have been the last thing someone saw before death? On release, the movie was panned and caught a painfully mediocre and disappointing end to the Shrek movies. You didn't see many people talking positively about it. The movie still made bank at the end of the day, but the world just sorta collectively shrugged. My genuine belief is that if Shrek the Third had never existed, and this was the actual Shrek 3 we got, then these review scores would not be nearly as harsh. A lot of people just wrote off Shrek Forever After and downplayed a lot of its unique strengths. I mean, with the way people were talking about it, you'd think DreamWorks had somehow managed to top the awfulness of Harold's death scene. Frankly, I think people's expectations are too high. Forever After has Cookie.
What's this? That's my chimichanga stand.
Thank you, Cookie, you're so valid. Then over the years, a lot more people start looking back at the film and realizing it actually isn't that bad, and people begin finding new things to appreciate about it. And then within the last 5 years or so, thanks to multiple big YouTube videos praising the movie, as well as people being more open to giving it a second chance, the film is now held in shockingly high regard, and most people consider it the movie that Shrek the Third should have been. It's really interesting how this went from being considered a mild step up from Shrek the Third, which is the equivalent of being told not to worry about the D- in your report card, to now be considered on par with or even better than the first movie. Now, do I agree with this assessment? Not even slightly, but I'm not going to deny that Shrek Forever After is a decent movie, and definitely the most enjoyable FOURquel we're talking about today. Not only does the movie actually have something new and substantial to say, as opposed to Shrek the Third being an hour and a half's worth of complete nonsense, but it feels like the franchise finally got its identity back, and the story it tells is very fitting for what was intended to be the final chapter. I said the final chapter, and specifically in regards to Shrek himself, it's a surprisingly mature and emotionally complex character arc. He has his happily ever after, a loving wife, kids, friends, and is no longer seen as the big, scary, ugly ogre he believed everyone saw him as for his entire life. People admire him now. He has everything he could ever want. But because all of this change happened over the span of a few years and him living the majority of his life as a loner who relished in the simplicity of his life, despite hating the fact that people would often judge him before they even knew him, it's all incredibly overwhelming for him, and there's a part of him that longs for that simple and easy life, when he could do whatever he pleased, could indulge himself, a time where he had no worries. He loves his wife, kids, and friends and deserves the life he currently has, but if he was given the chance to experience a taste of his old life and remind himself about how simple everything once was, he would take it. Basically, they gave Shrek a midlife crisis, and I think that was a stroke of genius, because we've seen him grow and overcome all the obstacles thrown his way over the past 3 movies. Yeah, the general perception of Shrek is that he's the funny green smash mouth guy, but as an actual character, he's always been pretty compelling and believable, giving him this Faustian deal to go back to a time when the world made sense to him, to have him choose to selfishly indulge in his fantasies only to have the rug pulled out from under him, and make him realize and appreciate what he had is a really smart move, and adds to how much of an emotionally tender story this is overall compared to the previous films. The film still has plenty of wacky Shrek stuff happening in it, fun action sequences, a good few laughs, and Rumpelstiltskin is a very entertaining villain, as unnecessary as this was. Jeez fucking God, stop doing that. But there's a real sense of finality to everything here that heightens the stakes. And I don't think I'm wrong in saying this is the darkest film in the franchise. Aha! I got you! Delete that tweet, mister, let me explain. It's not this super dark, brooding movie or anything, but the heightened stakes do make a pretty big difference. Seeing this alternate reality where far, far away is reduced to ruins, all of Shrek's friends are either enslaved or working against him, Shrek's life literally being put on the clock right in front of him while he's chained up and laughed at by the entire room. Just the fact that Shrek is genuinely gonna die, no strings attached, lets the slower and more emotionally tender parts of this movie leave much more of an impact than they did in Shrek 1, 2, and 3. It's a movie that feels like a proper finale. This joke is getting old, I'll stop. And a proper finale it is. The third act of this movie is incredibly satisfying, and it rounds out Shrek's character arc really well, bringing him back to his own reality and finally being able to appreciate everything he has. A true happily ever after that he deserves and accepts. Now, from what I've just described, it might seem like I really love this movie, right? Shrek Forever After is a f***ing mess. A very enjoyable, satisfying, and overall decent movie, but it's definitely not rock solid. There are plenty of jokes that just do not land. In fact, ignoring Shrek the Third's existence, which I do all the time anyway, this is probably the least funny Shrek film. Granted, a lot of that has to do with the higher stakes and far more emotionally mature narrative they've got this time around, but a good chunk of the jokes are just a result of Shrek being a fish out of water and trying to get his previous friends to recognize or remember him or believe anything he says while coming off as completely insane. This especially got old and really cringeworthy with Fiona. Narratively, it makes complete sense, but comedy-wise, they really drag this out, and after a while, Shrek constantly trying to get a kiss from someone who clearly does not recognize or remember him without their consent just really comes off as creepy and going a few steps too far. Again, narratively, I get it. Dude is literally trying not to die, he's desperate, but it was really unfunny, and I really think they could have dialed it back a fair bit to make Shrek come off as less of a creep. Everything involving Puss, I just hated. Having a Shrek movie of all movies make a bunch bunch of jokes at the expense of a character's appearance feels really tone deaf and completely flies in the face of the main theme and moral of this entire franchise. I did appreciate somewhat that they cut back on the pop culture references after how they dominated like 40% of Shrek the Third's script, but part of Shrek's identity is riffing on pop culture, like it or not. You just gotta do it right and actually tell jokes of it that aren't just, here's the thing you might recognize. The story also, again, didn't really call for pop culture reference spamming, not at all, but it's hard to deny that an unmistakable part of Shrek's identity has been lost. It could also be argued that the film's plot is a retread of the first movie, which I gave Hotel Transylvania 4 considerable amounts of shit for, and while it is entirely the point and they put plenty of their own unique spins on the story, I can't exactly argue against that. Rumpel, despite being a good villain, is used rather sparingly and doesn't have the amount of screen time I would have expected him to have, and overall it does feel like a lot of the life and wit that made the previous film so charming has been sucked dry from this one. Again, probably a result of the darker narrative, but coming off the heels of the witless Shrek 3 and then seeing how toothless this one is in comparison doesn't really give a strong impression. Shrek Forever After is a very messy film, but I can't deny that what it does well more than makes up for that fact. I did enjoy this movie, and thematically I thought it was a brilliant end to Shrek as a franchise, and concluded his arc in a way that I was satisfied with. I'm now extremely worried about how Shrek 5's existence is going to completely devalue Shrek Forever After. Time will tell, obviously, we're still a long ways off the release of Shrek 5, but everything about Shrek 5's existence is telling me it has no reason to exist, and I really don't want them to do anything else that completely undermines the lessons learned and the impact of Forever After's story on Shrek as a character. Might seem silly to care so much about Shrek's character development, but we've seen what happens when a Shrek movie doesn't have strong character work, and I do not want to spend another decade forgetting every last detail of a Shrek movie ever again. Okay, fine, I'll mention it. Do the Roll is funny, cry about it. Okay, let's look at the cast for this movie real quick. A lot of big names are here, honestly. I don't know why they bowled out so hard on the Oh no. Oh no. No, that's corny. It's corny, okay? I will not be corny about this. But I really want to, man. What do you mean Drake is in Ice Age 4? The Ice Age movies are some of the most profitable yet completely forgettable animated movies of all time, which hurts to say given how much of my time I spent watching them as a kid. The only Ice Age related thing I actually remember was that time there was an Ice Age 2 bumper running on Fox, and it made Sid the Sloth promote Family Guy on them.
It seems today that all you see is violence in movies and sex on TV.
Sid the Sloth from Ice Age has canonically said the word sex. Okay, scratch that. You know what Ice Age movie I do remember? Ice Age 3 Dawn of the Dinosaurs. I f***ing love that movie. Even today, I think it's still a good time and easily the best Ice Age movie by virtue of me actually being able to recall what happened in it. It won't blow you away or anything, and it's still Ice Age at the end of the day, but if you want to casually disassociate while you do some work or just want to settle down after a long day, you can absolutely get some enjoyment out of this, especially with Simon Pegg as Buck. He completely stole that entire movie every time he was on screen. But disregarding Ice Age 3, I have no idea how these movies became so successful. It's not even that the first movie was bad, like it's fine, and the sequel is like, okay, the sequel was ass, but I have no clue why Ice Age drew in such a large audience that you never actually hear anyone talk about or remember any of the events in these movies. They're like the shitty animation equivalent to the Avatar movies. They show up and take everyone's money and then no one talks about them ever again. Ice Age 4 feels like Blue Sky was just obligated to keep making Ice Age movies because Ice Age is literally the only profitable franchise they have, and you can really feel it here. All of the previous Ice Age movies, regardless of quality or memorability, at least didn't feel like begrudging obligations just to get a huge paycheck. Like, what can you really say about Ice Age Continental Drift? The villain is kind of fun. Peter Dinklage does a bang-up job, but Lord help this man find the ability to hit a convincing high note because he cannot fucking sing. You have multiple people in this cast that are capable of singing, but you give the only musical number in the movie to fucking Tyrion. The animation is surprisingly great. Scrat the Squirrel is still the best part of all of these movies by a long shot. They really nail the Looney Tunes style antics, and I always enjoy whenever the plot takes a break and cuts back to whatever he's currently suffering through. Those are the only positives I have to say because Ice Age 4 is just such a nothing movie. Like, there's pirates, they have pirates now. No one else has pirates. Like a Dragon Pirate Yakuza in Hawaii, which launches today, I think. Go buy that and have a swashbuckling good time. Okay, I'm done shilling for Yakuza. Let's get back to Ice Age 4. What is it with these movies and with every new installment making sure that every character has a love interest of some kind? Like, sure, go for it, but Jesus Christ, not every character has to f***. Manny and Ellie made sense. Ice Age 3's Scrat had a love interest, and that was fine and made for some funny moments. But now there's Diego and whoever this female tiger is, and then you get to Ice Age 5, which is like a genuinely unbearable movie, by the way. And they give Sid a love interest, they give Manny and Ellie's daughter a husband. Like, Jesus Christ, all these people are fucking. I have never seen a series of anything that was so concerned with giving each and every character a girlfriend or a wife or a boyfriend or husband. Like, do we need this many characters? This isn't even a critique, I'm just fascinated by the decision to give all of your characters a love interest of some kind. Wait, that is a critique, you are a lazy ass movie. Okay, I'm not over it. Why is Drake here? Why is Drake the love interest of Manny and Ellie's daughter? Drake shows his wild and woolly side in new animated film. Awful. Revolting sentence. Wait, I have to know this. Drake, no, come on, Drake, don't tell me. Okay, let's move on. Plot-wise, Ice Age Continental Drift doesn't do anything to justify itself either. Like, oh, there's a Continental Drift, that's the plot now. Any morals here are complete cookie-cutter slop, like Peaches learning to value her real friends, Manny learning to let go and stop being so protective of his daughter. Oh yeah, that's another thing, they do the whole overprotective parent thing with Manny, and I wish they just didn't bother doing that. Also, how old are any of these characters actually? Several years pass by with each new film. I mean, Peaches was a newborn baby in Ice Age 3, and in Ice Age 4 she's like 15. Manny and Ellie have got to be old as hell by now, surely. I'm sorry if this entire section is more so me tearing apart Ice Age in general and actually focusing on Continental Drift. That's because there really isn't much to talk about. Like, they balled out on this massive celebrity cast, nearly all of which are completely underutilized and filled with singers who never sing, then they make the one guy who can't sing for shit sing a sea shanty. The film has some really basic messages that you've seen pretty much everywhere else, and are executed half-heartedly because no one actually made this movie thinking, oh, this is gonna be such a banger, oh. Ice Age is a cash grab franchise, and Continental Drift, while not the worst Ice Age, is definitely the one that I remember the least. At least Ice Age 5 is so abominably awful I actually remembered some of the events that transpired in that film. As much as I may not care for Ice Age, I still think the way Blue Sky got railed by Disney was one of the most blatantly disrespectful and frustrating acts of corporate theatrics I've ever seen. Say what you want about their output, but they have plenty of talented people there. I mean, the Peanuts movie and Nomona are arguably some of the best animated movies to release within the past 10 years. I wish that kind of effort and passion was put into Ice Age when they were still around, but alas, Blue Sky are no more, and at the very least, it means that Ice Age as a franchise can finally be put to rest. Fuck. Yo, shout out to that one audio clip Pixar have of Woody screaming that they constantly reuse. Please keep using it for Toy Story 5, or forgive the fact that movie is about iPad kids if you do that. Alright, these next two movies I've already talked about before on the channel, so what I have to say will be paraphrased from what I have said in their respective videos. I'll try not to copy and paste literally everything down though, I promise. When it comes to Pixar sequels, you'd be hard pressed to find one more contentious than Toy Story 4, because holy shit, people fucking hate this movie, dude. Like, I personally am not a fan of it by any metric, but the sheer unabashed hatred people have in their souls towards this film is actually impressive. And I'm not gonna lie, while I personally don't see anything in this film that would cause me to go on a 10-minute rant about some guy losing his car keys, I completely understand and relate to a lot of the frustration around this film's mere existence. Toy Story, all things considered, has a fantastic track record with sequels. The consistent masterpiece level of quality that these movies used to reach with each new installment was unlike anything I'd ever seen. Toy Story 2 and 3 are genuinely earnest and fantastic films in their own right, and they're among some of the greatest sequels ever made. Scratch that, the original 3 Toy Story movies are some of the greatest movies ever made. I will live and die by that claim, I don't care. Most people agree that 2 and 3 are actually better than the first movie, and I agree wholeheartedly. Toy Story 2 may be my favorite, but 3, I don't need to go on and on about why people love 3, right? But it's such a beautiful conclusion that wrapped everything up near flawlessly. So naturally, the announcement of Toy Story 4 was a bit of a shock to the system. Everything about Toy Story 3 had that sense of finality to it. The start of the film is just straight up depressing, and while it does get considerably brighter as it goes on, on, it's still determined to make you an emotional wreck, wrapping up character arcs and tapping into the audience's shared emotions about growing up and moving on, leaving your childhood behind. It's not hard to see why the ending of Toy Story 3 is capable of turning even the most stable adults you know into a puddle of tears. It's an emotionally devastating film and I love it. So obviously many people were against Toy Story 4 from the very beginning, which speaks volumes as to just how beloved Toy Story 3 was as a conclusion. There wasn't a whole lot you could do from this point onwards without ruining that sense of finality, and when the film finally released, while it received critical acclaim, you're not gonna find many people online calling it a good sequel or a particularly great installment in the franchise, as a lot of people's fears about the film ruining Toy Story 3's conclusion were confirmed and amplified. But first, the film itself. Looking at this film completely divorced from the rest of the franchise, it's okay. Hell, it's probably good, I guess, I don't know. I mean, obviously there are good aspects of this film, but I rarely see anyone mention how funny the film is. Pixar's comedic timing is one of the few saving graces of many of their films these days, and Toy Story 4's comedy is pretty sharp overall. I think it's way funnier than 3 at least, and the new side characters are all fun. Keanu Reeves as Duke Kaboom, I mean Duke Kaboom is just really enjoyable. He definitely should have had more screen time. The film is just absolutely stunning to look at as well. Pixar having good animation is kind of a no shit moment, but Toy Story 4 is probably their best looking film to date, and when you look at the film's plot in isolation, it's genuinely pretty emotionally effective. What people take issue with is the fact that this is a sequel to Toy Story 3 and an installment in the Toy Story franchise. So while the film itself is alright, it does a lot of things wrong when it comes to the characters and story. Pretty much the entire iconic supporting cast of the franchise is relegated to cameos and nothing else, and that's a massive problem when in every other movie they have at least one moment individually that made them memorable. I mean, even Jessie gets shafted by this movie's plot, and she's been pretty important since the second movie. And the characterization of Buzz, man, what were they even cooking here? They have this really bad running joke about him listening to his inner voice, which just consists of him pressing his buttons and following random bits of advice. Like, Buzz isn't the smartest character ever, but he's not a f***ing Neanderthal. It's a complete slap in the face to anyone who was invested in him and after watching him grow, basically throwing nearly all of his character development out the window and turning him into a bumbling comic relief moron who has no impact on the story. He's only separated from the other toys because he's technically supposed to be the secondary protagonist of the whole series, and they needed him to do anything other than sit at the back of the cameo patrol. Yeah, it's cool they brought back Bo Peep, and it's nice to see her be given considerably more depth now that she's a main character, but that's all I can really say. It's just cool to have her here, I guess. The film has this whole existential thing going on with the introduction of Forky and his complete confusion over being alive. Honestly, man, been there. And while the film definitely tries tackling it, it very quickly gets thrown to the wayside, and I think they could have definitely explored that idea a lot more in more depth, and it could have made for something really special. And overall, Toy Story 4 is rehashing a fair bit of its plot from Toy Story 2. Now, it is cleverly rehashed. I didn't actually notice it too much when I first watched the film back in 2019, but now whenever I watch this movie, it just comes off as a poor man's Toy Story 2. And I'm probably really biased here because, again, that's my favorite Toy Story, but I digress. Woody's dilemma in this movie over choosing being a free toy with Bo Peep or staying with Bonnie and his friends is not only a complete retread of what Toy Story 2 did, it also leads to Woody choosing Bo Peep and his freedom over his loyalty to Bonnie, which felt like a completely out of nowhere 180 for his character. I get that Toy Story 4 tries to emphasize Woody's age and how tired he is a lot, but the core part of Woody's character that Toy Story 2 emphasized was his loyalty and his compassion. He gave up the chance to be more than just a kid's toy so he could help and watch Andy grow up. So even though this ending is a powerful emotional gut punch, it left a lot of people crying for the wrong reasons. Woody is the heart and soul of this entire franchise, and testing how strong his convictions are and his loyalty is a good idea. But when all you decide to do with that concept is just repeat the same plot as Toy Story 2 only to have him pick a completely different answer than he did back when he was given this first test of character, the entire ending falls flat on its ass. I'm sorry, but I don't think Woody would do this. I completely understand emphasizing his age and making him feel tired, like I went into this movie knowing it was going to be emotionally complicated. I mean, if you've seen the original teaser poster for this movie, like they were treating Toy Story 4 like it was Woody's version of fucking Logan. Like I was deadass preparing to see one of my favorite childhood characters die in this film, and I still think that would have been a more satisfying ending than him completely portraying who he is as a character. It would have been incredibly intense, don't get me wrong, but I just didn't see them taking this approach with Woody. Him leaving his friends and his owner to go run off with Bo Peep for the rest of his days was just not what I had in mind, considering the previous 3 masterpieces that ingrained into me from a young age who this character was. I like movies that take risks, even when they don't pay off, and I respect the attempt at a really risky risky ending here. But this risk didn't work for me, and the ending in general really sours my opinion on Toy Story 4 quite a lot. I could go over some other issues with the film's writing, but it's mainly how the film treats its characters that rub people the wrong way, and it's why it's often considered the worst in the franchise. I don't think Toy Story 4 is a bad film in the slightest. It's a very entertaining and emotionally earnest film, but there's only so much radical change in characterization you can get away with in a franchise that spans nearly 30 years. This is the single funniest frame to ever come from an animated movie. It's so funny, in fact, that I'm going to be leaving it in the background for the entirety of my time talking about this movie as an easy way to avoid copyrights. If DreamWorks wants to steal my money from me, I want them to be forced to see this image whenever I submit an appeal. Kung Fu Panda is one of DreamWorks' flagship franchises, and one of their most well-rounded and shockingly mature set of films. Kung Fu Panda 4 is what everyone expects a movie titled Kung Fu Panda to actually be like, and it fucking sucks. While it is true there are 6 Kung Fu Panda movies planned out, Jesus, most people accepted Kung Fu Panda 3 as the natural conclusion to a trilogy. And to Panda 3's credit, while it was seen as the weakest in the franchise, well, not anymore, but I'm getting ahead of myself, most people accept it as a satisfying conclusion, and the film overall felt pretty darn conclusive. So the announcement of a 4th Kung Fu Panda movie, while not exactly unwelcome given it's one of DreamWorks' most iconic and beloved franchises, definitely left a lot of people rightfully skeptical, and that skepticism only strengthened as more details about the film came out, along with a frankly hilarious amount of leaks. And when the trailer officially dropped, I was even less convinced, because it included nearly every leaked scene that I was already unconvinced by, along with some new scenes that started to make me worry a little. Despite this 4th film being planned for a while, it really did feel like an unnecessary sequel on pretty much every level to me, and when it finally did release, I was met with the most unsurprising dose of disappointments ever. Kung Fu Panda 4 feels like a first draft movie on autopilot. The pacing is breakneck. You would not believe how insanely fast this movie plays out. It's like watching a movie that is perpetually stuck at 2 times speed. When the movie got to the 20-minute mark, it genuinely felt like I had been sitting there for a good 40 minutes because of how hilariously inept the pacing is. From the minute the movie begins, it is determined to fry your cerebral cortex. It is bizarre, and it's not helped by the editing just not being able to keep up at all. Like this scene, for instance. Po and new character Zen, voiced by Awkwafina, an overall annoying little runt, have just gotten out of a bar fight and are now falling off a cliff. Please try to process the next 5 seconds of editing without laughing. What the fuck even was that? That's how this entire movie feels. The movie continuously jumps from one scene to the next, not giving any character moments, of the few there actually are, and story reveals any time to breathe. It's like the cinematic equivalent of waterboarding. It all goes by so quickly that your brain can barely register what's happening. And what's shocking about this is that Kung Fu Panda 4 is the shortest film in the franchise, clocking in at an hour and 20 minutes. There's enough plot and interesting ideas here that could easily be played out in a movie that has an extra 15 or even 20 minutes added onto the runtime. Regardless of some of the ideas here being genuinely interesting or even good on paper, none of it is done any justice or is given time to be fleshed out. A huge part of this movie's marketing came from the idea of Po fighting all of his previous foes, who were in fact just the new villain, the Chameleon, in disguise. But that never happens. Tai Lung at least gets actual dialogue, but Shen and Kai don't even speak, and there's never any moment where Po genuinely believes he's fighting his old enemies or whatnot. He finds out about the Chameleon at the start of the movie. It's only when Po and the Chameleon first fight that she turns into Tai Lung, Shen, and Kai, but they are only brief transformations. This movie's marketing is incredibly misleading, and it removes a large part of my interest in the film's story, not helped by how much of a wet napkin the new villain actually is. I was skeptical about the Chameleon from the very beginning, and can I just say that for a franchise that is renowned for having some utterly fantastic villains, the Chameleon is not just a disappointment, she is a f*** up of biblical proportions. In the previous movies, you get the villain's deal and their motivations immediately. You're shown how badass they are, what they're capable of. They have an all-consuming presence on screen, they get shit done. The Chameleon? Look, I have a whole video ranting about how the Chameleon is generally one of the worst DreamWorks villains ever, but to summarize, her entire gimmick is transforming into anything she wants. But unlike how the trailer suggested the film would play out, she doesn't have any unique powers, she just transforms into stuff. It's only later in the film do you actually get the scene where she steals the kung fu of everyone trapped in the spirit realm. It would have been far better if she had some new way of going to the spirit realm from the very beginning of the film, as opposed to needing Oogway's staff. If you switch this scene with Tai Lung getting his powers stolen and you put it at the start of the film, this not only establishes the chameleon as a genuine threat, it also actually displays how terrifying her powers are. Obviously, the script would need to be rewritten, but this is a far better and more effective opening scene than the one we got, and it would lead to the chameleon actually having a commanding screen presence, because otherwise she's just a pathetic fraud with no menace whatsoever. The scariest thing she does is kick someone down a flight of stairs after turning into an elephant. Every single previous villain in this franchise is better by a long shot, and given how easily she goes down, it becomes clear just how hard the marketing was carrying her and propping her up as the most powerful adversary Poe has ever faced. She isn't. The film prioritizes constant jokes as opposed to actual storytelling, which just doesn't work with Kung Fu Panda. There's none of the emotional sincerity and maturity that defined the previous films. It is a movie designed purely for kids that ignores the appeal the franchise had towards older audiences and has very little respect for what came before. Kung Fu Panda 4 has Poe clinging on to being the Dragon Warrior and really struggling to find his inner peace. In general, the way the film handles Poe's character arc is really disappointing and flies in the face of the previous two movies. Poe's whole arc in Kung Fu Panda 2 is about overcoming his childhood trauma, the loss of his parents, and the attempted genocide of his people by Lord Shen, finding his own inner peace. The finale of Kung Fu Panda 2 is an emotionally powerful conclusion and led to Poe growing as a character, healing from his trauma and not letting the past define him and distract him from the present. Poe's arc is what made that finale so satisfying, and it's a big reason why Kung Fu Panda 2 is commonly seen as the best film in the franchise. Poe struggling to find his inner peace, something so important to him in the second movie, and having it played out as a joke really doesn't sit right with me, and his whole spiel about how the Dragon Warrior is who he really is really doesn't feel right to me. Kung Fu Panda 3 is generally just kind of forgotten about in this movie. Like at pretty much every turn, it acts like the third film didn't happen, aside from bringing back Poe's dad. Poe's entire conflict in that film stems from him having an identity crisis brought along from him being given a new role as a teacher to the Furious Five, along with how he feels regarding his adoptive and biological dads. And you want to know what conclusion he came to? Was he the son of a panda, the son of a goose, a student, a teacher? No, he was all of them. F***ing raw. Then we snap back to Kung Fu Panda 4 and it's like I'm watching a version of Poe who hasn't progressed since the first movie. Someone who lacks the maturity and depth of a character who had a perfect arc spanning 3 entire movies. Someone who hasn't faced his trauma and healed from it and found their inner peace. Someone who doesn't know who they are or where they belong in the world despite already finding the answer. I'm overall left incredibly disappointed with where this movie takes the series and handles its characters. I could keep going on about the many issues this movie has, but I've already copy-pasted enough from my Kung Fu Panda 4 review already. I'm sorry this last bit was really lazy on my part, but I just cannot be bothered to re-explain why this movie sucks so much. And that was the world of animated FOURquels, a painful box of mediocrity, a painful mixed bag, a painful... the pain box from Dune. This video was me putting my hand in the pain box from Dune. I will gladly put this joke on my CV and hope it gets me put on the writing team for Shrek 5. Despite a couple of these films not being so bad, this ended up being a really draining experience. Just watching back-to-back mid over and over and over. It was honestly more interesting talking about how disappointing they were compared to their predecessors and actually getting into the plots themselves, because what can you really say about these before it gets tiring? While I found a few new things to appreciate in some of these, I wouldn't recommend going out of your way to watch any of these except for Shrek Forever After, honestly. Like, yeah, Toy Story 4 is probably better overall, but the ending really kills it for me and many others. If there is one film you must watch out of this pile of trash, let it be Shrek Forever After. It has Cookie. Cookie is awesome. Anyway, that's the end of the video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a fantastic day or evening. Play Pirate Yakuza. It's out now and it's peaked, okay? Just play it.